Long ago, before history, before time was carved into calendars, the people of the North stood beneath cold skies and listened, not to kings or priests, but to the world itself. The wind spoke, the rivers sang, the stars whispered truths too old to name, and from those whispers came the prophecies. They did not speak of simple endings. No, the Norse saw something greater, cycles that breathed, like the ocean, like the trees, like time itself. They saw fire swallowing sky, wolves chasing the sun, a serpent so vast it wrapped the earth. They saw gods fall, the world drown, and from the ashes, green shoots rising once more. They called it Ragnarök, not the apocalypse, but the fate of everything. It was not fantasy, not fiction. It was memory, perhaps, or warning. But what if the Viking myths were more than stories? What if they carried echoes of real events, of ancient destruction, cosmic rhythms, and forgotten knowledge, passed through fire and ice? This is the story of those prophecies, how they were born, what they foretold, and what they might still mean for us. Now, as we stand once again at the edge of something old returning. This is the entire story of the Viking Prophecies. Deep within the frozen reaches of ancient Scandinavia, where fjords cut into the land like veins through the earth's skin and long nights stretch endlessly under pale auroras, a people once whispered tales not merely of gods and warriors, but of time itself, of cycles that turned like the stars overhead, of endings that returned again as beginnings. These were not idle stories, told only to entertain by firelight. To the Norse, prophecy was as real as the bite of winter, and among the most chilling of their tales were the visions of destruction, the warnings of Ragnarök. This word, Ragnarök, has echoed through centuries, often simplified into the end of the world, yet it is something far more layered. In its truest form, it means the fate of the gods, a series of events so grand, so cosmically significant, that even the divine must bow to time's unfolding. It was not merely an apocalypse. It was a renewal, foretold in a tapestry of visions passed down through poets and skalds, etched in runes and remembered in stone. But who gave the Norse these visions? And could they truly have glimpsed a deeper truth, one that speaks of global cycles of destruction that reach far beyond their icy shores? The story begins not with fire or ice, but with silence, the yawning void of Ginnungagap. Before the world, there was this great emptiness, a nothingness that lay between two primal realms, Niflheim, the world of frost and mist, and Muspelheim, the world of fire and chaos. Where their powers met, life began to stir. Melting ice revealed the first, being Ymir, the progenitor of giants, and from him came the bones of the world. The gods who emerged, Odin, Vili, and Ve, did not simply arise. They formed themselves as the architects of order, slaying Ymir and shaping the cosmos from his remains. His flesh became the earth, his blood the oceans, his bones the mountains, and his skull the sky. Even the stars were sparks from Muspelheim, caught in the dome above. This creation was not gentle, nor accidental. It was violent, deliberate, and fated. And in this beginning, The seeds of the end were already sown. The Norse saw time not as a straight line, but as a great circle, a cycle where the past bled into the future, and the future remembered the past. Their myths were filled with signs, omens of what was to come. The great ash tree, Yggdrasil, stood at the center of all things, its roots stretching across the 9 realms, and from it came whispers, premonitions of trembling roots, bleeding sap, and the end of balance. But Ragnarök was not only foretold by gods, it was seen by mortals too, in the sagas and Eddas, in visions passed through bloodlines and dreams. There were warnings of Fimbulwinter, a great winter lasting 3 years with no summers between, a harbinger of collapse. It would be followed by chaos. Brothers slaying brothers, families torn apart, the old ways abandoned, and then the skies would open. Jörmungandr, the world-serpent, would rise from the seas, its body so massive it encircles the earth. Fenrir, the great wolf, would break his chains and run free. And Loki, the trickster, both god and chaos incarnate, would return to lead the forces of disorder. The sun and moon would be devoured, mountains would crumble, flames would consume what ice could not. This was the shape of the prophecy, terrifying and yet deeply rhythmic, as if the Norse were describing not just one great end, but many, repeating. Could it be that what they saw or sensed was more than mythology? That perhaps encoded within these tales are echoes of ancient cataclysms, of real events that reshaped the world? Were the Viking prophecies an intuitive understanding of something the earth has always known, the breath of life, followed by the exhale of destruction? To understand the deeper layers of the Viking prophecies, one must look beyond the battlefields of gods and giants and listen to the spaces in between, to the rhythms in their myths that resemble the pulses of the earth itself. The Norse people were seafarers, but also observers, watchers of the sky, readers of the land, keepers of memory through song. Their myths were not just stories of the divine. They were mirrors held up to the natural world, reflecting tides, seasons, eclipses, and storms. And in these patterns, they saw omens. The idea of Fimbulwinter, the endless winter, is more than just a chilling metaphor. It bears uncanny resemblance to periods of abrupt climate change known throughout Earth's history. Volcanic eruptions, solar cycles, oceanic shifts, all have caused dramatic drops in temperature and harvest failure. Could the Norse memory of such an event, perhaps passed down from even more ancient ancestors, have become crystallized into myth? In this way, prophecy becomes less a look into the future and more a coded recollection of the past. Yggdrasil, the great tree that binds the worlds, trembles in the prophecies, its roots gnawed by Nidhogg, the dragon of decay. This image of something vast and interconnected, slowly being corrupted from within, speaks not only of spiritual doom, but ecological collapse. The Norse may not have had modern terms for such ideas, but they perceived balance and its disruption. They knew that what affected one part of the world echoed through the whole. And in the shuddering of the tree, they saw the warning signs. Even their concept of the 9 realms may hold more than symbolic meaning. If seen not just as otherworldly domains, but layers of reality or aspects of nature, then the collapse of the nine could mirror a kind of systemic failure, a fall of interwoven systems. Their mythology doesn't separate the sacred from the physical. A crack in the heavens might just as easily mean a breach in the earth. And so, the end was never far from the beginning. The gods themselves, for all their power, were not immune. Odin, the All-Father, endlessly seeking wisdom, sacrificed himself to gain knowledge from the runes. And yet even he was fated to fall to Fenrir. Thor, mighty and bold, would slay the serpent Jörmungandr, only to take 9 steps before succumbing to its venom. Each figure, though heroic, was bound by fate. No one escapes Ragnarök, not even the divine. This acceptance of inevitable collapse, followed by rebirth, is one of the most profound aspects of Norse belief. What comes after the fire and ice is not oblivion, but a new dawn. From the ashes, a new world emerges, green, fresh, untouched. The surviving gods return. Baldur, once slain, is reborn, and humanity too begins anew. 2 figures, Lif and Lifrasir, emerge from the sheltering woods, and they repopulate the world. This eternal cycle of death and rebirth echoes countless other ancient beliefs, but in the Viking vision, it is laced with an unusual calm, a stoic readiness to meet the inevitable. Could this philosophical resilience be born from generations who lived close to nature's fury, who watched glaciers carve valleys, storms flatten homes, and volcanoes darken skies? Their prophecies may not have come from crystal balls or divine voices, but from memory, the long memory of the earth itself, speaking through myth. The question then shifts. Not whether they predicted the end, but whether they remembered it. In the silence of snow-covered forests, where wind sighs through pine and ice clings to ancient bark, the echoes of prophecy live in more than words. They reside in feeling, in intuition passed from generation to generation. The Viking worldview was steeped in a sense of time that was neither linear nor forgetful. They believed in a fate called word, a force that wove the threads of all existence, binding gods and mortals alike. Nothing happened without reason. No life unfolded without purpose. And no end came without the promise of something more. This belief was not fatalistic. It was deeply observational. The Norse noticed patterns everywhere. In the curling of ferns before the frost, in the migration of birds before a storm, in the red sky before snow. These patterns shaped their understanding of prophecy. They did not need temples filled with oracles. The land itself whispered truths to those who listened. The very structure of their mythos reveals this cyclical awareness, an unshakable certainty that what has happened before will happen again, only in a new form. Take, for example, the 3 roosters who crow before Ragnarök begins. One crimson bird calls out from the realm of the giants, one golden from the halls of the gods, and one soot-red from hell, the land of the dead. These crows are not random omens. They symbolize warning across all levels of existence. Elemental calls from chaos, divinity, and the underworld. The crowing is not just sound, it is resonance. The kind that travels through dream and blood, like a memory long buried but never lost. Then there is the ship Naglfar, the vessel that sails during Ragnarök, carrying the enemies of the gods across a storm-ripped sea. It is made entirely of the nails of the dead. A haunting image, yes, but also one of accumulation. It suggests that decay itself builds toward destruction, that what is left untended, what is ignored or denied, will eventually return with force. The ship doesn't simply appear. It is crafted slowly over time, nail by nail, warning by warning. There is a rhythm to collapse, the Norse seem to say, and the signs are always there, if you dare to look. Within the great hall of the gods, Valhalla, even the honored dead prepare for the final battle. This suggests that the end is not feared, but embraced. For the Norse, glory was not in survival alone, but in meeting fate with clear eyes and strong heart. The Einherjar, those fallen warriors, train each day in anticipation of Ragnarök, not to prevent it, but to play their role within it. This notion offers a view of destruction that is not panicked or tragic, but almost serene. The world ends, so it may begin again. The forces of chaos, too, are not simply evil. Loki, who leads them, is a god of contradiction. He is blood brother to Odin, father of monsters, source of mischief, and catalyst of change. In many ways, he represents the unpredictable spark, the necessary instability that allows transformation. His children, Fenrir the wolf, Jörmungandr the serpent, and Hel the queen of the underworld, are not monsters without meaning. Each stands as a force of imbalance that must exist within the greater whole. Without chaos, order stagnates, and the Norse understood this balance intuitively. So when the sky is split and the stars vanish, when the seas boil and the earth quakes, when fire and frost meet once more, it is not destruction for its own sake. It is the cleansing wave, the great correction, the necessary darkness before a dawn. And perhaps this is what the Viking prophecies truly tell us. Not that the world will end in one single cataclysm, but that it always ends, and always begins again, in waves, in rhythms, like breath, like tide. The deeper you travel into the Viking vision of fate, the clearer it becomes that theirs was not a prophecy born of fear, but of profound acceptance. Even the harshest imagery in their Talus the fire giants of Muspelheim, the wolves chasing the sun and moon, the serpents coiled beneath the waves, were not symbols of doom, but reminders of the balance upon which everything rests. A balance delicate enough to break, and yet strong enough to return. Consider the wolf Sko, who chases the sun, and his brother Hati, who pursues the moon. Each day the heavenly bodies race across the sky, never quite caught, but destined to be. And when they are finally consumed, darkness falls. This motif is echoed in many cultures. Yet in Norse belief, it carries a particularly rhythmic pulse, like the ticking of a cosmic clock. The sun's light must fade, not forever, but so that something new can emerge from the shadows. The cycle is merciless, but never meaningless. In the heart of Midgard, the realm of humans, the people lived close to the earth, and the myths were not distant fables, but parts of their very existence. Thunder was Thor's hammer crashing through the heavens. The wind might be the breath of Odin seeking wisdom, and when the ground trembled, it was surely the serpent Jörmungandr stirring in the depths. These were not just metaphors. They were a language of connection, a way of reading the unseen forces that shaped the visible world. Volcanoes were portals to Muspelheim. Earthquakes, the rage of buried giants. Comets, the swords of divine warriors flashing across the sky. And what of the long winters? The Norse may have carried ancestral memory of the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden cooling at the end of the last ice age, or of other regional climate shifts that left a mark on oral tradition. When harvests failed and snow blanketed the ground for seasons beyond measure, it was not just misfortune, it was a whisper of prophecy. Ragnarök, then, was not some far-off nightmare. It was always near, folded into the bones of the earth and the breath of the wind. And this closeness gave the Norse people a unique resilience. They knew that beauty was fleeting, that peace was a pause between storms, but they also knew that from ruin rose renewal, that even in the darkest hour, the fire was not only to destroy, but to illuminate. In the end, this worldview offers a kind of peace, a release from the illusion of permanence. For if everything is destined to change, to fall, to shift, to transform, then clinging becomes unnecessary. The Viking soul met the storm not with despair, but with readiness. And perhaps that's why their stories remain. Not because of their violence or grandeur, but because of their truth. A truth still echoed in our own fears of collapse and dreams of rebirth. To understand the soul of Norse prophecy, one must also understand their relationship with time, not just its cycles, but its texture. Time for the Norse was not abstract. It had weight, presence, and memory. The past was not dead. It walked beside them, speaking through ancestors, land, and legend. This belief created a living mythos, a world where ancient truths were not buried, but breathing. When they spoke of Ragnarök, they were not pointing to a distant age. They were describing a current, a pull, a breath already drawn in. This breath was felt most clearly in the concept of Urður, one of the three Norns who spin the fate of all things. Urður represents the past, not merely events that occurred, but the accumulated memory of the world. The Norns Urður, Verdandi, and Skuldo not just weave destiny, they are the loom, the threads, and the rhythm. They dwell beneath Yggdrasil at the well of Urd, where they water the roots of the world tree, with knowledge drawn from the depths. Each droplet they use holds echoes of past worlds, of lives lived and lost, of suns born and swallowed. And yet, even as they shape the tapestry, they do not control it. That is the strange paradox of Norse fatet is absolute, yet no god is truly its master. Even Odin, who sacrificed his eye for wisdom and hung himself upon the tree to understand the runes, cannot escape what is foretold. This humility before fate imbues Norse mythology with a rare stillness, a kind of serene acceptance that even the most powerful must yield when the wheel turns. That turning wheel is not silent. It rumbles through the tales, in the feet of giants that shake the mountains, in the roar of the oceans as Jörmungandr stirs, in the flickering light when the sun wanes unnaturally early. These are not just fantasy images, they're symbolic encodings of real, observable forces. Tsunamis, earthquakes, eclipses, all find their mirrored forms in Norse imagery. The end times they describe are cosmic in scale, but deeply rooted in the rhythms of Earth. Consider the doom of the gods not just as a divine war, but as a breakdown of systems. In Ragnarök, Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that links the worlds, is shattered. This is the collapse of connection, the failure of the great pathways. Heimdall, its guardian, blows his horn, Gjallarhorn, not in anger, but in warning. A sound that resonates through all the realms. This call is symbolic of finality, but also of awakening, of alertness. The same tone can be found in human history. Whenever systems begin to fray, when signals are sent, but no longer understood. Yet even as everything falls, there is a strange order to the chaos. The wolf Fenrir breaks free only when the final bonds of the gods' strength are loosened. Loki's ships sail, when the oceans swell beyond their limits. Surt, the fire giant, does not bring flame from nowhere. He brings it from Muspelheim, the realm of primal heat. Each destructive force has a home, a place in the grand story. And that is perhaps the most telling part of Viking Prophecies. It doesn't deny destruction, it frames it. By placing even the darkest forces within the map of the cosmos, the Norse myths offer a vision where nothing is alien. Fire, ice, death, decay, these are not intrusions. They are players in the cycle. Their presence is terrifying. Yes, but it is also natural. This inclusion creates a kind of emotional resilience, a mental clarity in the face of endings. The idea is not to flee from collapse, but to understand it, and by understanding, to face it with quiet dignity. Within the ruins of Ragnarök lies the whisper of rebirth. That is what makes the Viking vision so different from many apocalyptic traditions. It is not obsessed with finality, but with continuation. The world doesn't end in silence or ashes. It ends so it can breathe again. This concept, so deeply woven into Norse cosmology, reveals an ancient psychological wisdom. The knowledge that all things must rest, must break, must fall, so they may grow again. And what rises from the ruin? Not only gods reborn, but a world renewed. The earth, scorched by Surt's fire, lifts itself from the sea once more green, fertile, untouched by past corruption. Mountains rise where none were before. Rivers run clean. And in this fresh world, survivors walk again. Among them are Lif and Lifrasir, humans who hid within the shelter of Yggdrasil's bark during the storm of flames. They emerge not to reclaim, but to begin anew, to plant the seeds of humanity once more. This idea of refuge, of life hiding within the very fabric of the world tree, is rich with metaphor. It suggests that even during the most catastrophic events, life persists quietly in sacred spaces, that there are always sanctuaries, not just physical but spiritual, inner places where the spark survives. And it is from these hidden fires that the new world kindles. The Norse knew that even the darkest night is still shaped by the promise of morning. Among the gods, not all are lost. Baldur, the beloved, returns from the realm of the dead. His death, long mourned, was one of the first harbingers of Ragnarök. But now he walks in sunlight again, a symbol not just of forgiveness, but of healed wounds. With him is his brother Hother, and together they preside over a land free of shadows. This is not the restoration of the old order. It is the blooming of something entirely new, and the gods, Having learned from suffering, walk gently. Even the golden game pieces of the Aesir are found once more in the grass, as told in the Voluspa. These were the symbols of their past joys, their ancient pastimes. To find them again in the new dawn suggests continuity, memory carried forward, not to repeat the past, but to honor it. These details, small as they seem, show the Norse vision of rebirth not as a clean slate, but as a gentle unfolding, where the echoes of what was are not lost, but softened. Could it be that the Viking mythmakers were encoding not only their fears but their hopes? That in Ragnarok's fire they were not only warning of destruction, but preparing the soul for renewal? Across cultures, stories of flood, fire, and darkness persist. The Norse tale stands among them not just for its grandeur, but for its grace. It teaches not that one must escape the end, but that one must stand through it, and watch, and wait, and remember how to begin. The Viking Prophecies are not just about fate, they are about endurance, about carrying light through fire, about finding balance in chaos, about trusting that even when the sky falls and the sea swallows the land, the story is not finished. It turns again, and with it, so do we. There is a strange comfort in the idea that the world ends not once, but many times, that within each ending lies the echo of another beginning. The Norse saw this clearly, not only in their prophecies of Ragnarök, but in the structure of their daily lives. Each winter was a small death, each spring a rebirth, the sowing of seeds and their harvest, the freezing of fjords and their thawing, the shifting of stars overhead. All of it reminded them that nothing stays the same, and that change, though sometimes cruel, is necessary. This worldview extended into their ethics, their honor, their very identity. To face one's fate, however harsh, was to align with the deeper truths of the cosmos. Cowardice was not defined by fear, but by avoidance. And so even their gods walked into doom, not with desperation, but with fierce grace. Odin rides to his death knowing the outcome. Thor battles the world-serpent, fully aware of the price. These are not stories of tragic heroes. They are stories of participants in a sacred unfolding. The Norse didn't seek to control nature. They sought to live in rhythm with it. And so when disaster loomed, be it in the form of storm, famine, or enemy blooded, was not seen as the end of meaning. Instead, it was folded into the meaning itself. Destruction was a phase of life, as holy as birth, and prophecy, far from being doom-mongering, was a tool for preparing the heart, a way of teaching the soul how to bow, how to endure, how to rise again. It is no wonder, then, that their myths resonate even now, in a world grappling with its own sense of looming collapse. Climate shifts, extinction, economic uncertainty. Echoes of Fimbulwinter creep into modern consciousness. The prophecy of 3 winters with no summer, of brothers betraying brothers, of the world unraveling from within. These themes no longer sound like distant legends. They feel present, immediate, unnervingly relevant. But here, too, the Viking legacy offers something precious: perspective. In the face of chaos, it offers not panic, but preparation. In the shadow of destruction, it offers remembrance. In the wake of collapse, it offers a seed. because no matter how violent the storm, the roots of Yggdrasil still drink from the well of memory. And as long as the tree still breathes, the song goes on. This song is not sung only by gods. The humans of Midgardnary people living between frost and flame carry it too. Their stories, though less grand in scale, were just as sacred. The shepherd, the mother, the seafarer, the blacksmith, each held within them the pulse of fate. And when the end came, it was not only the divine who mattered, but those who remembered how to live in harmony with the cycles, who knew the land, the sky, the breath of the world. To peer into the Viking Prophecies is to stand at the edge of time itself, to glimpse a universe where endings bloom into beginnings, and even the gods must answer to forces beyond their reach. It is a place where silence holds as much power as thunder, where the soft creak of tree roots carries the same gravity as the clash of swords. In this world, everything speaks. The wind murmurs old truths. The fire recalls ancient wars. The sea sings of memories it cannot drown. One of the most profound symbols in all Norse mythology is Yggdrasil, the world tree. It is not merely a tree, but the spine of reality. Its roots stretch into the deepest realms, Helheim, where the dead dwell, Jotunheim, land of giants, and into the well of Urd, where the Norns write fate itself. Its branches rise beyond the clouds, touching realms of light and mystery. But despite its power, Yggdrasil trembles. It suffers. It bleeds. Even the most sacred thing in the cosmos is vulnerable. And still, it stands. The tree's vulnerability is its wisdom. For Yggdrasil knows that to live is to be shaped by wind, by water, by worm and whisper. Beneath it gnaws Nithhugr, the dragon of decay. This image is not one of failure, but of balance, growth and rot, life and death, together feeding the cycle. Without decay, there is no renewal. Without endings, no fresh beginning. And so the tree does not fight the dragon. It simply continues. It survives by yielding, not resisting. In this, Yggdrasil becomes the perfect mirror of the prophecy itself. Such images were not distant to the Norse people. They felt them in daily life, in the way old wood cracked under snow, in how fire consumed a hall, but warmed the bones, in the stories carried by the elderly, whose voices cracked like bark, yet held truths deeper than any rune. The myths were not decorations. They were survival tools, emotional maps for navigating real trauma, loss, and rebirth. Even the way they remembered time the spiral, not the line, gave them psychological strength. For in a spiral, you always return, but never quite the same. You ascend or descend, but you pass again through familiar space. In this way, Ragnarök was not only inevitable, it was necessary. Not a failure, but a stage. And if that is true, then the present moment, the modern fears of environmental collapse, political unraveling, and social division may also be part of something ancient and cyclical. Perhaps we, too, are approaching a Ragnarök, and perhaps that is not a sentence of doom, but an invitation to remember what must be preserved, what must be let go, and what must be planted anew. In the quiet spaces between storms, the Norse myths whisper truths about endurance, not just of people or gods, but of meaning itself. When the world shatters, when mountains fall into the sea and fire scorches the sky, what remains? What thread continues through it all? The answer, the Norse believed, lies not in structures or empires, but in memory, in the stories we carry and pass on, like seeds in winter, waiting for spring. The Voluspa, the prophecy of the seeress, is one of the oldest and most powerful poems in Norse literature. It opens with a voice from the deep past, a Velva, a wise woman, who has seen the cycles of the world turn more than once. She speaks to Odin himself, not with fear, but with clarity. Her visions are not meant to prevent the end. They are not warnings in the modern sense. They are revelations of what must be. She recounts the creation of the world, the rise of gods, the betrayal and decay, and finally, the fall and return. This poem is the heart of Norse eschatology, and it begins in stillness. That stillness is important. It reminds us that prophecy does not come in panic or noise, but in the slow unfolding of vision. The Velva is not a warrior or a god. She is a keeper of memory, a living archive. Her sight reaches beyond time's veil, and yet she speaks plainly. In her words, fire walks beside frost, and destiny is neither cruel nor kindred, simply is. She is the voice of the earth, the whisper in the wind that says, remember, watch, do not be surprised. Her vision of Ragnarök includes not only gods and giants, but symbols that stretch deep into the unconscious. The sun grows dark, the earth sinks into the sea, stars vanish from the sky. These are not only celestial phenomena, they are emotional states. They speak to despair, to loss, to the feeling of disconnection. When the sky falls and the ground trembles, it mirrors what happens within us when all familiar things collapse. The Norse knew that the outer world and the inner soul were reflections of each other. Even the clash of deities during Ragnarök, Odin facing Fenrir, Thor fighting Jörmungandr, rich with inner meaning. Odin, the seeker of wisdom, dies in the jaws of the great wolf. It is a reminder that even knowledge has limits, that some endings cannot be reasoned away, and yet his death is not the end of wisdom, for it is passed on. Thor kills the serpent, but its venom kills him in turn. It is not triumph or failure, it is balance. In Norse cosmology, even heroes do not win forever. They play their part, and then they fall. But from that fall rises something quieter, more enduring. In the end, the seeress speaks of a hall with a golden roof, brighter than the sun, where the righteous shall dwell. It is not Valhalla, it is something gentler, more eternal, a place beyond war, a place for peace. It is the world healed, not restored. And this, above all, may be the prophecy's greatest gift, not the destruction of the old, but the possibility of something entirely new. If we return to the image of Yggdrasil, the great tree of life, we begin to see how everything connects. Its roots draw water from wells of fate. Its trunk houses creatures, both sacred and strange as squirrels who carry gossip, stags who gnaw the leaves, eagles that watch from high branches. Beneath it writhes Nidhogger, feeding on decay. This tree is not pristine. It is not pure. It is alive, dynamic, in constant transformation. And so too is the world. So too is prophecy. To the Norse, prophecy was never meant to shield from pain. It was meant to prepare the spirit, to awaken the part of us that remembers not just what has happened, but what always happens. Ragnarök is not simply the end of an age. It is the test of how well we listened. The wolf breaks free. The fire rises. The bridge collapses. And through it all, the question echoes, what remains sacred? Modern ears may hear these stories and think of fantasy, but those who listen deeply will hear something else, a kind of primal resonance. For the Viking prophecies do not belong only to the past. They stir the same questions we face today. Are we living out cycles of forgetting and remembering? Are we approaching our own Fimbulwinter, where truth is buried under snow and kin turn against kin? And if so, what comes next? In the world of myth, endings are always thresholds. The Norse believed that the void from which the world was born Ginnungagap would return. But this was not a fearful thing. It was a reset, a pause between heartbeats. From the gap, life would stir again, as it always had. New gods, new people, new songs. The story would begin, not identically, but familiarly, like a melody remembered in sleep. And perhaps this is why the Norse stories still comfort, even in their brutality. They do not deny pain, they do not offer false promises, but they do suggest something radical. That destruction can be meaningful. That collapse is not emptiness, but fertile soil. That beyond even the deepest darkness, there is always the shape of light waiting to return. In this way, the Viking prophecies are not warnings. They are invitations, not to avoid the end, but to meet it with open eyes. Not to mourn the fall of the old world, but to prepare the soul to plant again, and to carry with us not fear, but memory, wisdom, and the soft promise of dawn. To truly grasp the essence of the Viking prophecies, one must listen not just to the words of the seeress or the clash of gods, but to the silence between the lines, the space where meaning lingers. The Norse myths are layered in a way that defies modern categories. They are at once stories, warnings, memories, and reflections. And behind each image, whether it's a ship made of dead men's nails or wolves devouring the sun, there is a pulse, the steady beat of an ancient understanding that all things are temporary, but nothing is meaningless. Take the ship Naglfar, a vessel of dread, not built by carpenters, but formed from the neglected remnants of the dead. It sails at Ragnarök, carrying the armies of chaos. Its symbolism is unsettling because it points to a deeper truth, the idea that what we leave behind, what we do not tend to, may one day rise up. In this way, the prophecy becomes a mirror. Our own inactions, our collective forgettings, are not lost, they gather weight. They take form, and eventually they return. But the myths do not stop there. They are not simply dark for the sake of fear. They carry balance. Even as the gods fall and the sea rises, the world is not abandoned. On the contrary, it is renewed, not through triumph, but through endurance. And that endurance comes not just from the mighty, but from the humble. Two human figures, Lif and Lifrasirhid, within the bark of Yggdrasil, nourished by morning dew, surviving as the old world burns. Their names mean life and desire for life. They do not fight, they endure. And in doing so, they preserve the future. What a quiet, profound statement. In the face of cosmic collapse, it is not swords that save the world. It is life itself, choosing to continue. A small, persistent flame hidden in the roots of being. This is not merely hope, it is a deeper kind of knowledge. That rebirth does not always begin in glory. Sometimes it begins in the dark. In the hidden, in the quiet decision to remain. Even the gods do not escape this lesson. Odin falls, and with him the old order, the structure of wisdom gathered through sacrifice. But Baldur, the gentle, returns. A god once slain by accident and trickery, now reborn to guide the new age. This shift from war to peace, from struggle to light, is central to the myth's heartbeat. The old must yield to the new, and the new must learn from the old. This is not simply narrative, it is cycle, rhythm, necessity. And what of us? The ones who read these myths in the electric glow of a far-off age. Perhaps the reason the Viking prophecies still call to us is because we, too, are standing on a threshold. The old world shows signs of cracking. Systems falter. Fires rage. Waters rise. And we, like the Norse, feel the stirring of something ancient. Not just fear, but memory. As if, somewhere deep within, we remember that this has happened before. There is an ancient rhythm beneath all things. A deep, slow song that continues even when the surface is loud with storms. The Norse people may have lived among harsh winters and endless night, but they knew how to listen for this song. They did not fear the dark as something evil. They understood it as part of the pattern. Night follows day. Winter follows harvest. Death follows birth. But always, the wheel turns again. This is why the image of Fimbulwinter, the 3 endless winters, with no summer between, cuts so deeply. It is not just a tale of cold. It is the removal of the rhythm, the breaking of balance, a world out of step with itself. Crops fail, kin fight, warmth disappears. It is a chilling vision not because of its frost, but because of its silence. The silence of things ceasing to work, of systems once known now failing to respond. And in that silence, prophecy speaks. The Norse would have felt this pattern in their bones. Their lives were inextricably tied to the land, the sea, the sky. A shift in wind meant a change in fate. A failed crop meant not just hunger, but possible extinction. And so they watched. They remembered. And when they spoke of wolves chasing the sun and moon, they weren't merely imagining. They were mapping forces seen and unseen, forces that affect us still. In modern times, we speak of climate change, of extinction, of global disorder, and yet the structure of these crises feels eerily familiar, like the beginning of a story we already know. The long winter, the growing division, the rise of fire and water. Could it be that the Viking vision was not only myth, but memory, the memory of older collapses, of forgotten ages, of truths buried beneath ice and ash? And if so, what then? Do we brace for doom, or do we listen? Do we panic, or do we prepare? The Viking path offers a third way, not denial, not despair, but alignment. To accept that the cycle turns, to tend what we can, to remember the deep song beneath the noise. This is what prophecy truly offers, not a roadmap, but a reminder. A reminder that life endures not always through conquest, but through resilience, through roots that reach deep even in frozen ground, through hearts that stay open even in darkened skies, through stories passed on when the flames die down and the embers glow soft. And so, even as the Norse sang of the end, they also sang of what comes after, not as fantasy, but as sacred truth. In the end, the prophecy is not about the gods or monsters alone. It is about us, how we walk through endings, how we carry the flame, how we choose again and again to be part of the turning. As the Norse wove their prophecies into poem and saga, they did so not with the cold detachment of distant storytellers, but with the intimacy of those who lived alongside the very forces they described. Their world was not divided between the sacred and the mundane. It was all sacred. The howl of a wolf could carry meaning. A falling star might signal a shift in the fabric of things. And in their myths, this seamless blending of the natural and the mythical allowed them to speak truths that reached far beyond the literal. In this worldview, time was not a straight road with a single destination. It was a spiral, a wheel, a wave, rising and falling. Even the gods were caught in this rhythm. Odin, king of the Aesir, was not all-powerful. He was a seeker, one who sacrificed himself to himself, hanging on Yggdrasil for 9 nights to grasp the runa symbols of fate, wisdom, and deep truth. His act was one of surrender, not conquest. He did not control fate. He sought to understand it. And yet, he too would fall at Ragnarök. The lesson was clear. No one, not even the highest, escapes the cycle. This humility before fate created a cultural strength that ran deeper than weapons or walls. The Norse did not believe they could outrun destiny, but they believed they could meet it well. This is why so many of their heroes and gods go to their end with eyes open. They do not rage against the dying light. They walk into it with honor. For them, to know the story was not to fear it, but to be prepared to play one's part in it. And it is perhaps this readiness, this brave surrender to the inevitable, that gives their prophecies such lasting power. They do not offer false comfort. They do not claim that the world will be saved at the last moment. Instead, they tell us that the world will end, and that this, too, is part of the greater harmony. They show us that endings are not failures. They are part of the structure of the world. The image of Surt, the fire giant, leading the charge at the end of days, his sword brighter than the sun, is terrifying. He burns the world not out of hatred, but because it is time. And yet, even in that fire, the seeds of rebirth are sown. The land will rise again from the sea. The grass will grow. The sun will shine again, a new sun, born of the old. It is not salvation by miracle, but transformation through fire. The gods who return are not the same. They are changed, tempered by death, shaped by loss. They come back wiser, softer, more whole. Even Balder, whose death was the first great sorrow of the gods, returns. He walks again in the green world, no longer a tragic figure, but a symbol of healing. This is the gift of Ragnarök, not only the cleansing of corruption, but the renewal of beauty, not in spite of destruction, but because of it. And still, beneath it all, the great tree endures. Yggdrasil, whose roots stretch into the wells of fate and whose branches cradle the heavens, remains the axis of the world. Even as it trembles and bleeds, even as Nithhogr gnaws at its roots, it does not fall. Its survival is not a denial of change, but a testament to continuity, to the underlying structure that holds through all transformations. In this, Yggdrasil is not merely a tree, it is time itself. It is memory. It is connection. And in the Norse understanding, everything of worth is somehow tied to it. The Norns dwell at its base, watering it with the waters of Urd's well. The gods gather at its trunk to hold counsel. The creatures that live within it, stag, squirrel, eagle, serpent, each play a role in the ecology of myth. It is a universe in miniature, alive, imperfect, sacred. And this idea that something living, breathing, flawed, and resilient can hold the entire cosmos deeply comforting, because it mirrors us. We too are made of contradictions. We carry wisdom and fear, love and rage, creation and destruction. The Norse myths don't ask us to be perfect, they ask us to be true. To stand with our roots in the past, our branches reaching forward, and to endure whatever storms come. Even the prophecy's darkest images, the devouring of the sun, the freezing of the earth, the drowning of the world, are not final. They are passages. The sun is swallowed, but a daughter of the sun is born. The world sinks beneath the sea, but rises again. This constant turning reflects a deep trust in nature's cycles, a knowing that after every winter, even the Fimbulwinter, spring returns, and with it, life. This cyclical vision is not unique to the Norse. It echoes through cultures across the globe. But what makes the Viking version so powerful is its tone. It is not panicked. It is not desperate. It is grounded. There is pain, yes, but also peace, even joy. The joy of standing on the edge of the world, axe in hand, heart steady, knowing that even in death, the story continues, that something is carried forward, that the song goes on. And what is carried forward? Not the empires, not the riches, but the memory, the runes carved in stone, the names whispered by firelight, the stories sung under cold stars. These are what endure. These are what seed the next world. This is what the Viking prophecies teach us. Not how to prevent the end, but how to walk through it, how to lose what must be lost, how to preserve what matters most, and above all, how to begin again. In the long hush that follows the final clash of gods, after the flames of Surt have devoured the heavens, and the sea has claimed the land, a stillness settles across the new world. It is not silence born of absence, but a silence of waiting, of breath, held in anticipation. The ashes cool, the waves calm, and slowly, from beneath the waters, the earth rises, green once more, fresh, untouched by the scars of the old age. And with it, the song begins again. The Norse were not simply recounting myth when they spoke of this renewal. They were revealing a truth that lives within every ending, that something always remains. that no matter how absolute the fall may seem, there is always a thread, always a root, always a flicker of life, waiting to stir again. In this moment of rebirth, their mythology becomes not just a cycle of time, but a map for the soul, a reminder that we too must burn, must fall, must rest, and then we rise. The survivors of Ragnarök are not grand armies or kings. They are Baldur and Hothir, returned from the shadows. They are the children of Thor, Magni and Modi, carrying his hammer into a world that will never again need it as a weapon. They are Lif and Liferasir, human and humble, sheltered in the bark of the world tree, emerging not with trumpets or fire, but with breath. Their survival is not a conquest. It is a quiet continuation, a simple act of being. This simplicity is essential. In a world that prized bravery in battle, it is striking that the final hope lies not in strength, but in presence, in the decision to continue living, to nurture, to grow. The message is subtle but profound. True power lies not in defiance of death, but in devotion to life. And from this devotion, the new world is born not as a mirror of the old, but as something entirely new. And yet, not all is left behind. Memory, too, rises with the dawn. In the grass of the new world, the golden game pieces of the gods are found once more. These are symbols of joy, of peace before the fall. Their reappearance signals not a return to the past, but a reawakening of what was good and true. The future, in the Norse view, is not a rejection of history, it is its transformation. This vision offers something rare: hope without denial, courage without illusion, a belief that what is best in us can survive what is worst around us, that in the face of destruction, the choice to nurture, to remember, to love, becomes sacred. The Viking Prophecies do not promise safety, but they do promise continuity, and in that, they offer strength. As the new world blooms, the great cycles begin anew, not identically, but familiarly. The sun shines brighter, unshadowed by wolves. The rivers run freely, no longer choked by ice or ash. The heavens are open, and the winds carry no scent of war. It is a world that remembers, but is not haunted. A world that sings not of survival alone, but of potential. In this green dawn, there is space not only for rebirth, but for change. And here lies one of the most profound truths buried within the Viking Prophecies. Transformation is not only possible, it is inevitable. The Norse did not see the future as fixed. Even within their belief in fate woven by the Norns, older than the gods themselves, they made space for becoming. Destiny, to them, was not a chain, it was a shape, a current. You could not escape it, but you could choose how to meet it. This is why their gods, even knowing their doom, fought with honor. Why their heroes, even facing certain death, stood firm. They knew that the outcome could not be changed. But the manner of their passing could define the legacy that followed. And in that space, in the how, not the what, they found freedom, dignity, meaning. And so the new world rises not on the backs of victors, but on the shoulders of those who held true to that quiet strength, who did not flee from the storm, but who endured it without losing their essence. Those who remembered what it meant to be whole, Even when everything around them broke, those who carried forward the light not loudly, but steadily through the longest night. In this way, the Norse vision of the apocalypse becomes something deeply intimate. It is not only about gods and worlds, it is about each of us, about how we respond when the ground shifts, when the sky darkens, when everything we relied on falls away. Do we become lost in the chaos, or do we listen to the deeper rhythm and remember who we are? The Viking answer is clear. We remember, we endure, we step forward, not blindly, but with eyes wide open. We carry the past not as weight, but as wisdom. We do not deny the fire. We walk through it, and on the other side, we plant again. Perhaps this is what makes their prophecy so deeply human. It acknowledges despair, but it refuses to be defined by it. It sees the darkness, but chooses, again and again, to reach for the light. There is a certain quiet wisdom in recognizing that destruction does not mean the end of everything, only the end of what no longer serves. The Viking prophecies, though draped in images of flame, frost, and collapse, were never designed to frighten. They were meant to awaken, to teach, to remind us that even the strongest walls crumble, even the brightest stars fade, but life true, enduring life has always known how to continue. And so, in the Norse worldview, survival is not merely a matter of strength, it is a matter of alignment, of being attuned to the great turning, of sensing when the winds shift, when the old ways begin to fray. To live well in such a world meant not clinging to permanence, but flowing with change. To know when to fight and when to let go. To understand that nothing lasts and that this is not a curse, but a hidden blessing. Because only when the old passes away can the new take root. Only through the fading of one age can the birth of the next unfold. And in this, we see why the Norse myths are not just endings in disguise, but beginnings wrapped in layers of truth. Ragnarök is terrifying, yes, but it is also cleansing. It burns away illusion. It strips away excess. It returns the world to what is essential. This perspective is reflected even in the smallest moments of their stories. The frost giants are not evil only old. They represent a force that must eventually give way. The gods are not infallible. They are learning, growing, bound like all things to time. Their mistakes echo through the world, and their lessons too. We are not asked to worship them, but to understand them, and perhaps to recognize ourselves in their struggles. In Odin's endless quest for wisdom, there is the echo of every seeker who has ever longed to understand. In Thor's ferocity, the fire of those who protect what they love. In Loki's chaos, the shadow within each of us that disrupts and questions and transforms. These are not distant figures. They are reflections, archetypes, mirrors. And this too is part of the prophecy's power. It is not concerned with predicting specific events or disasters. It speaks instead to the pattern beneath them, the structure of collapse and renewal that shapes all life. Civilizations rise and fall, cultures flourish and decay, yet always, somewhere, the thread continues. Somewhere, someone remembers. Someone plants. Someone sings the old songs in a new world. even the act of remembering carries weight in Norse cosmology. Memory was sacred. The names of the fallen were spoken to keep them alive. The deeds of the past were retold not to glorify war, but to preserve meaning. In the old halls, stories were not simply entertainment, they were nourishment. The voice of the skald, the poet, was as important as the warrior's sword. For in words, the soul of a people was kept alive. And so when we read of Ragnarök, when we listen to the Volva's ancient vision, we are participating in that act of remembrance. We are tending a fire that has burned through countless nights. A fire that does not consume, but warms, that lights the way forward when all else goes dark. This fire is the essence of prophecy, not foresight as prediction, but as guidance. As a torch passed hand to hand across the ages, what makes the Viking vision so unique is its honesty. It does not promise escape. It does not flatter the listener with tales of divine rescue. It shows us a world that falls, and then gently, without fanfare, rises again. And in this rising, there is no rush, no call to arms, only the quiet return of life. Grass pushing through ash, water returning to the rivers, light dawning without a sound. This is the truest kind of resilience. Not loud, not defiant, but steady, unshaken at its core. Like Yggdrasil itself, which trembles, bleeds, yet does not fall. It bends beneath the storm, but its roots hold. And in that holding, a promise is kept, a continuity maintained. The world may change, but the thread of being, of presence, remains. And that thread runs through us, through our breath, our memories, our stories. We are, in a way, the new world. Each act of kindness, each moment of silence, each seed planted in uncertain ground is part of that rebirth. We do not need to witness fire giants or great wolves to understand what the Norse saw. We only need to look around, and within. The cycles are always turning. So when the skies seem dark and the winds howl louder than they should, perhaps it is not the end. Perhaps it is the space between beats, the breath before the song continues. And perhaps, like the figures of the myth who emerge after the storm, we too are meant to step forward, not as conquerors, but as caretakers, as stewards of the next beginning. Somewhere deep in the folds of the new world, after the fires of Ragnarök have cooled and the sea has pulled back from the broken shores, a silence settles, a sacred stillness, not of emptiness, but of potential. The Norse did not imagine a return to what once was. They imagined a world transformed, a world that has passed through the eye of destruction and emerged, changed, softened, aware. The grass that grows here is not the same as before. It is nourished by ash, touched by sorrow, and made strong by survival. This idea that the world does not simply reset, but evolves, one of the most profound elements hidden within the Viking vision. It is not a cycle that turns in exact repetition. It is a spiral, moving forward, rising through layers of experience. Each fall makes the soil richer. Each collapse teaches something that the next age will carry. The gods themselves, when they return, do so not unchanged, but with a new kind of grace. Baldur, once cast into death by mistake, now emerges as a figure of light. Uther, who caused that death, returns with him. They walk together. There is no vengeance, only understanding. This reconciliation between opposing forces is not accidental. It is the heart of what makes rebirth possible. The fire of Surt does not simply destroy it, purifies. The ice of Niflheim does not simply numb, it preserves. In the Norse worldview, these polarities are always in conversation, always shaping each other. And when the balance tips too far, when the cycle becomes strained, a correction comes. It is painful, but it is never without purpose. Even the most terrifying images of the prophesied Midgard serpent uncoiling from the depths, the wolf Fenrir swallowing the sun, the skies splitting under the weight of Gjallarhornir, not final ends. They are thresholds, crossings, and the beings who cross them are not monsters in the simple sense. They are necessary forces. Jörmungandr, the serpent, encircles the world. He holds it together. Fenrir is bound not because he is evil, but because his time has not yet come. Their release is not chaos. Unleashed it is the next part of the pattern revealed. And in this revelation, there is something ancient and familiar, a memory that stirs not only in myth, but in the bones of humanity. Perhaps we carry these stories not because we believe in literal fire giants or wolves in the sky, but because they echo something we already know, something the earth has whispered to us in dreams and storms, that nothing is forever, and that is exactly why it matters. To live with this knowledge is not to live in fear, it is to live fully, to cherish what is, to tend to the flame while it still burns. The Viking prophecies do not ask us to prepare bunkers or build walls. They ask us to remember, to feel, to remain rooted like Yggdrasil even as the winds howl, and to trust that even when the boughs break, the roots will remain, reaching deep into memory, deep into being. If there is one thread that runs through all the Viking prophecies, it is the thread of continuity, not of the same stories repeating endlessly, but of truths that travel through time, dressed in new forms. The Norse knew that fire would return, that ice would follow, and that the world would again rise green and breathing from the deep. They knew that what lives must die, and what dies will one day live again. And this cycle, though fierce, was not feared, it was respected. That respect is written in the very fabric of their myths. Consider Heimdall, the ever-watchful guardian of the gods, who stands at the edge of the Bifrost Bridge, listening for the stirrings of doom. He is the watcher, the one who hears what others ignore. And when the end draws near, it is he who sounds the horn not to panic the world, but to awaken it. The sound of Gjallarhorn is not just a signal of war. It is a call to awareness, to readiness, to presence. This is a key lesson that flows quietly beneath the louder tales of battle and flame. Awareness, the understanding that prophecy is not about predicting dates or disasters. It is about staying awake, being present to the subtle changes in the world, noticing when the air shifts, when the old structures begin to creak, when something deep within begins to murmur of change. And in that awareness, finding the courage to respond not with fear, but with grace. Even as the gods prepare for their final stand, they do so without illusion. Odin seeks the wisdom of the dead. He consults with the Volva, not to find a way to avoid fate, but to understand it more clearly. He gathers knowledge not to escape the end, but to face it fully. There is something incredibly human in this, something vulnerable and true. For in that search, we see ourselves looking for meaning in the darkness, seeking clarity in chaos. The story does not demand perfection. It does not ask for heroes without flaws. It invites us instead to be whole, to carry our doubts, our grief, our weariness, and still step forward. The gods are not invincible. They are not untouched by sorrow. And yet, they stand. They ride to meet what must come. And in doing so, they give us a model, not of conquest, but of honor. And perhaps this is why, even after 1,000 years, these stories still speak. Because we too are riding into unknown futures. We too feel the tension of old worlds trembling beneath our feet. And we too must decide what kind of legacy we leave, not in monuments, but in memory. Not in stone, but in how we face the fire. And as the cycle turns, as the world we know begins to shift in ways large and small, the Viking prophecies remind us of something timeless, that though the sun may be swallowed, a new light will rise. That though the tree may tremble, its roots are deep, and though the world may fall, life will find a way to bloom again. Even as the old gods fall and the heavens collapse, the Norse myths leave space for something most sacred of all: remembrance. Not the kind etched only into stone, but the kind that lingers in song, that hums beneath the skin of the earth and stirs when the wind moves just right through the trees. It is this remembrance that carries the true power of prophecy. The idea that the story does not end with ruin, but flows into something new, something wiser, something softer. We are told that after the great flames of Surt, after the crashing of waves and the swallowing of the sun, the earth will rise again from the sea, green, fertile, peaceful. This image of land reborn from water has appeared in cultures across the world. It is the image of purification, of restoration. And in the Norse version, it is not the return of the same, it is the beginning of something that has learned. The new world is not a replica. It is a child of the old. There is an important difference between repetition and evolution, and the Norse seem to understand that. The spiral of time means that themes return, but never quite the same. Each Ragnarök is a shedding, a composting of what was, making space for what can be. The new sun that shines after the old one is devoured is not just a replacement, it is a descendant. The flame that once warmed the world will burn again, but with different light. This is not fantasy, it is deep metaphor, a poetic rendering of how life always emerges from what was lost. And within this vision, we find another beautiful truth, that survival is not reserved for the mighty. Lif and Lifaras, Erthe, two humans who endure air, not warriors or kings. They are ordinary, unknown. They hide, not in castles, but within the shelter of a tree. They survive not by conquering, but by being. And from their quiet choice to continue, a new humanity is born. It is an image of resilience that speaks softly but powerfully. Sometimes, survival is the quietest act of all. The gods who return Baldur, Hother, and the children of Thordo not do so with vengeance. They come into the light without hatred, without fire. They bring with them the memory of what was, but also the openness to what might be. In their arrival is a lesson for every age, that after great endings, we do not need to rebuild what was lost exactly as it stood. We are allowed to change, to let go, to build anew, with gentler hands. And in this gentle beginning, prophecy finds its deepest voice note as warning, but as invitation, not as thunder, but as whisper. It asks us not to predict the end, but to imagine the rebirth, to hold space for the dawn, even as the night closes in. It is perhaps fitting that in a world so shaped by ice and fire, the Norse people came to see destruction not as a punishment, but as a reset. They lived in landscapes carved by glaciers, warmed by fleeting summers, shaken by volcanoes. They knew intimately that nature was not tame. It was change itself. And from this closeness, they developed stories that mirrored the world's fierce grace, stories that did not seek to defy the forces of nature, but to understand them. Their myths, then, were not escapes from reality. They were expressions of it. And in these expressions, we find encoded knowledge, a kind of ancient psychology, the fear of the long winter, the respect for the unseen, the understanding that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in holding on, but in letting go. These are the truths that drift beneath the surface of the Viking prophecies, like deep currents beneath a frozen sea. Take, for instance, the wolves, Skjold and Hati, who chased the sun and moon until at last they catch them. It is a terrifying image, the devouring of light. But what follows is not eternal darkness. From the devoured sun is born a new sun, more radiant than the first. Again, we see the theme, not of simple doom, but of transformation. Light is not lost forever. It simply passes through shadow to become something more. Even the serpent Jörmungandr, whose death is intertwined with Thor's own, serves as a symbol of closure. It is the creature that encircles the world, holding it together with its massive form. When it rises, the structure is broken, the boundary dissolves, and yet from that breaking, a new shape can emerge. Boundaries are necessary, but they are not forever. Sometimes they must dissolve so that growth can begin again. It is no coincidence that so much of this myth is centered on natural imagery: trees, rivers, beasts, the sun, the stars. The Norse knew that prophecy was written not only in rune and poem, but in storm and season. They watched the sky as much as they read the sagas. They understood that time itself leaves clues, that cycles are not only abstract ideas, but physical rhythms that echo through all things. And perhaps that is why even now their stories feel alive, because we too feel the turnings. We sense the end of an age. We feel the fires rising and the ice returning. And though our gods have different names, our fears are much the same: collapse, loss, the unknown. But the Norse offer more than fear. They offer a map, a reminder that there is life beyond the fall, that the fire does not burn forever, that the sun will rise again not as it was, but as it needs to be. And we, like Lif and Lifrasir, must be ready to emerge from the roots, to open our eyes, and to begin again. As the sun climbs once more into the sky of the new world, and grass pushes quietly through blackened earth, there is no great celebration in the Norse telling, no horns of triumph, no glory claimed. Instead, there is stillness, a kind of reverent silence, as if even the gods themselves are taking a moment to breathe in the newness of what has come. This silence is powerful. It tells us that rebirth is not always loud, that beginnings can arrive like morning mist, gentle, slow, certain. In this reimagined world, there is no throne to be reclaimed, no ancient city to rebuild. The past is not forgotten, but it is not repeated either. What rises from the ruin is not nostalgia. It is something truer, something softened by time and shaped by fire. The gods who return, Balder radiant, Hother quiet, Magni and Mothi bearing Mjolnirdo, so not as rulers, but as guardians. They bring with them not orders or decrees, but presence. They represent continuity, but also change. The golden game pieces found in the grass, seemingly trivial, carry profound meaning. They were once used by the gods in play, in peace, before the world grew heavy with fate. Their rediscovery in the new dawn is a message. Joy, too, survives. Not the joy of conquest or control, but the simple, pure joy of being, of existing together in a world remade. This is a reminder that the purpose of prophecy is not only to guide through fire, but to lead us back to beauty. It is also a reflection of the Norse view of divinity, not as perfect beings, but as deeply interconnected parts of the cosmos. The gods were flawed, mortal in their own ways, bound to fate like all things. Yet they loved, they sought, they fell, and they rose again. They were not distant forces. They were close, intimate, human in their struggles, divine in their persistence. And so, in their return, we are reminded not of dominance, but of balance restored. Even the monsters of the old world are gone. Fenrir, Jörmungandr, those ancient beings who served their purpose and vanished into mythare, not mentioned again. Their time has passed. They were not evil. They were necessary. Their destruction made the new world possible. This is not a victory over darkness. It is a harmonizing of the story. The cycle has completed. A new one begins. And now, with no prophecy left to fulfill, the future is open. The Norns have woven the fate of the old world. But what of the new? Perhaps its threads are still being spun, not by gods, but by those who walk the earth with eyes wide, with hands that plant, with hearts that remember. The next age is not foretold, it is chosen, moment by moment. And what of us, the listeners, the dreamers, those living in a world that feels, at times, as if it stands on its own trembling brink? We read these stories not merely as echoes of a lost belief, but as reflections of a truth that still stirs within. The prophecy of the Norse is not just about their world, it is about ours. It is about all worlds that stand, collapse, and rise again. The signs described in the sagas are strangely familiar. A long winter without summer, the breakdown of kinship, the rise of fire, the drowning of land. These are not only metaphors. They mirror events we have faced, may still face. And so we ask ourselves, were the Norse looking ahead? Or were they remembering something ancient, some echo of a great turning that once was and may come again? This possibility that what they called Ragnarök might hold the memory of real cycles of destruction opens a door. It invites us to listen differently, to read the world as they did, not as fixed, but flowing, not as linear, but turning. In this way, prophecy becomes less about fate and more about awareness, about how we attune ourselves to the signs, about how we meet what comes with grace. It teaches us that we do not need to fear the end, for endings are woven into all beginnings. The leaf falls to make room for new growth. The sun sets to allow the stars to speak. Collapse, in the deepest mythic sense, is not failure. It is transition. The old gives way because it must, because something is waiting to grow in its place. And perhaps, like the survivors in the myth, we must learn not how to resist the fall, but how to live after it, how to find shelter not in walls, but in roots, how to carry not pride, but care, how to remember the old songs and sing them softly into the new day, not as orders, but as offerings, not as dogma, but as memory. Yggdrasil still stands, even now, in us. We are its branches, reaching. We are its roots, remembering. And though the dragon still gnaws at its base, though the wind still pulls at its crown, the tree does not fall. It lives because we remember it, because we continue, because we carry forward what matters most. And if the cycle turns again, if fire rises and the sea reclaims the land, then let us be like the myths. Let us walk into that moment not with fear, but with wisdom, with quiet resolve, with a seed held in our hand, and the song of renewal on our lips. There is something deeply comforting in the idea that the story continues, that no matter how total the collapse, something remains. The Norse vision of the world's end is fierce, but it is not hopeless. It is grounded in the ancient knowing that life does not stop, it transforms. What once was turns into what will be. And in the ashes of one world, the soil is made ready for another. In the stillness after Ragnarök, the sagas tell us little of what comes next. There are no detailed instructions, no great blueprints for how to rebuild. Instead, there are images. Simple, quiet, luminous. A green earth rising from the sea. A new sun warming the land. Two humans stepping into the light. Gods, not as rulers, but as companions to this new beginning. It is enough. Because in these few images lies a truth we rarely hear in modern tales. That renewal needs no fanfare, only space and willingness. And perhaps this is the most radical idea buried in the Viking Prophecies, not that the end comes, but that after the end, there is peace. Not imposed peace, not the silence of control, but the peace that comes from surviving something profound, the peace that follows when nothing is left to prove, when the old battles are over, when the only thing left to do is live well. To live well, in the Norse sense, is not a matter of comfort or ease. It is about being aligned with the land, with the sky, with the rhythms of change that move through all things. This is why their myths are filled with weather, with beasts, with elemental signs. They saw no separation between the world within and the world without. The fire that raged in Surt's sword was the same fire that burned in the human heart. The frost that covered the earth was the same that numbed the soul in grief. And so, to live well was to live aware, to meet the elements in yourself and in the world with presence. The gods who survive Ragnarök are changed. There is no return to Asgard, the shining realm in the sky. It is gone, and no attempt is made to rebuild it. Instead, there is Vithblain, the hall with the golden roof, where the righteous dwell. It is not a fortress. It is a sanctuary, not a seat of power, but a place of light. The world has moved on, and those who inhabit it do so gently. And we, in our own world, stand often at thresholds, at the edges of what was and what might be. We face our own forms of Ragnarök, upheaval, transformation. And though our fires may be different, the questions are the same. What do we carry forward? What do we leave behind? What do we become after the storm? Perhaps what the Norse understood better than most was that endings are not failures. They are fulfillments. The end of the world, as they saw it, was not a punishment. It was the final note in a song that had to be sung, a necessary release, a clearing of space. And when that note fades into silence, the next melody begins. Not from a blank slate, but from the memory of the last. This is why their myths are so filled with continuity. The golden game pieces found in the New World's grass are not just remnants, they are reminders. That joy was once here. That play and peace once had their place. And now they can again. That even after fire, we may smile. That even after the deepest night, we may laugh softly into morning. And this soft return, this quiet coming back to life, is not made by kings or warriors, but by the simple persistence of life itself. Lif and Lifrasir do not conquer, they endure. They emerge not with weapons, but with wonder. They are humanity's answer to all the fire and ice. Not resistance, not conquest, just presence. The willingness to grow again. In their story, we are reminded that we don't need to have all the answers, that we don't need to be grand or powerful to matter, that sometimes the most sacred act is simply to stay, to remain, to keep breathing, to keep remembering. In this act, there is more strength than any blade, more wisdom than any throne. And so the world turns again, slowly, gently. A new rhythm takes hold, a rhythm that is not disconnected from what came before, but is deeper for having passed through shadow. The sun that shines is brighter because we remember darkness. The peace that blooms is fuller because we remember war. And the life we live is more precious because we know it can end. This, then, is the final gift of the Viking prophecy knot. Fear, not warning but understanding, that we are part of something vast, ancient, and alive. That the world has ended before, and may again, and that this is not cause for despair, but for reverence. For each moment, each breath, each turning leaf. For in the great silence after the end, life listens, and then, gently, it begins again. In the vastness of myth, where gods rise and fall, and the world burns only to bloom again, there is a quiet truth that pulses beneath the grandeur, the truth that all things sacred are, in the end, very simple. A tree, a breath, a name spoken in memory. The Norse, surrounded by ice and sea, by dark winters and luminous skies, built their understanding of existence not around control, but around awe. And from that awe came their prophecies maps, not of escape, but of rhythm, of endings that make space for beginnings. Yggdrasil stands through all of it, not untouched, but unwavering. The great tree does not flee from the fire, nor does it fight the gnawing dragon beneath. It remains, not because it is unbreakable, but because it is rooted in the deepest soil of being. And perhaps this is what endurance truly means, not to resist change, but to live through it fully, to tremble and yet not fall, to bend and yet still grow. And that is what we see in the rebirth of the world. Not perfection, not utopia, but resilience. A world that carries memory like a scarnet has a wound, but as a story. The old gods are gone, and those who remain do not rebuild the shining halls of Asgard. They do not resurrect what was. They walk a quieter path, through forests regrown, across rivers reborn. Their power is not in what they command, but in what they now understand. The old weapons are set aside. Even Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor, is inherited by his sons not as a tool of destruction, but as a symbol of protection, of strength, tempered by loss. There is no great war left to fight, only a world to tend. And so we see that the greatest courage in the Norse prophecy was never in the battles but in what comes after, in the slow, patient work of healing. And perhaps that is where we find ourselves today, somewhere between what has fallen and what is yet to rise. In our own age of endings, of change that feels vast and uncertain, the Viking vision speaks like an echo from the deep pasta reminder that collapse is not the end of meaning, that from ash and silence, something true can still be born. We need not know the shape of the new world to begin building it. We need only the willingness to remain, to listen, to plant, to speak softly what we remember. To carry forward not the weapons of the old age, but the wisdom it gave us, and to hold in our quiet hands the seed of what may come. In the fading embers of the old world, a new kind of light begins to glow, not the blinding blaze of conquest or certainty, but the soft warmth of something remembered, something ancient and true. This is the light the Norse left us, not in towers or temples, but in the shape of their myths, stories carved into wood, passed by firelight, carried in breath. The Vova, the seeress, who speaks the prophecy in the Voluspa, does not speak from a place of power. She is not a queen, not a god. She is memory-given voice. She speaks from the deep well of Erd, where all things are known, not because they are predicted, but because they are felt. Her words are not spells, they are mirrors. And when she finishes her vision, when she has seen the fall and the rise, the fire and the green earth, she does not end in fear. She ends in stillness, in knowing. This kind of knowing is not loud. It does not clamor for attention. It simply is. It waits for those ready to hear. And for those who do, the message is clear. The world will change. You will change. Everything you build may fall, but what is essential will endure, not because it is strong, but because it is woven into the very roots of being. What is essential then? The myths do not say it outright. They do not hand us commandments or creeds. They offer something better: images, moments, feelings, a tree that bleeds and grows, a serpent that encircles the world and then breaks it open, a brother forgiven, a world made new not by might but by presence. These are the signs. These are the guides. And perhaps, like the Norse, we are meant not to memorize the prophecy, but to live it, to feel its rhythm in our own lives, in our own falls and risings, in the long winters of the soul. in the fires that burn through what we thought we needed, only to reveal what we truly are. We walk not toward the end, but through it. And on the other side, there is always something growing. This, finally, is the gift. Not escape, but belonging. Not protection, but participation. We are not outside the story, we are within it. And like the tree, like the earth, like the gods who rise, changed from their trials, we too may yet return, gentler, wiser, whole. There is a sacred humility that underlies the Viking vision of the world, a deep reverence for the turning of things, and for the quiet forces that shape the story beneath the surface. Fire may consume mountains, frost may harden rivers, gods may rise and fall, but always, always something continues. And what continues is not always loud. Often, it is what is smallest. A whisper, a root, a heartbeat in the dark. The myths never claimed that life would be easy, or that the end could be avoided. They claimed instead that the end could be endured, that beauty does not disappear, it transforms. The fire that raises the forest also clears the underbrush. The serpent that breaks the world also ends the cycle of stagnation. Even Fenrir, the wolf who swallows the sun, is not evil, he is fate, necessary, part of the pattern. And so, we begin to understand that these stories were never about villains and heroes in the modern sense. They were about forces within us, around us, moving through us. Order and chaos, death and birth, memory and forgetting, all necessary, all connected. The gods do not escape their fate because they are gods. They meet it because they are wise. Wisdom, in this telling, is not the same as certainty. Odin gives his eye not to gain control over fate, but to better see it. He sacrifices, not to win, but to understand. This is what the runes teach him, not power, but pattern. A way of reading the world that does not flatten it, but deepens it. And when he finally meets his end, it is not a failure, it is a completion. We too are offered this vision not to arm ourselves against change, but to stand in it, not to fear the end, but to recognize its place. The Norse did not leave us instructions, they left us presence. The memory of trees that remember, wolves that run with time, and suns that die only so they may rise again, brighter than before. And now, standing near the end of this story, we find ourselves not at a wall, but at a gate. We have walked through creation and chaos, prophecy and destruction, silence and renewal. We have watched the old gods fall, the earth be remade, and humanity take its first soft steps into a new dawn. What remains is not what was, but it is enough, because it holds the one thing that has always endured, not power, not permanence, but memory. The sacred remembering that the world lives through us, and we through it. That we are not outside the story, but part of its turning. And if the fire returns again, if the ice thickens, if the serpent stirs beneath the sea, we will know, and we will remember what to do. The winds that move through the new world are not the same as before. They are gentler now, wiser, as if they too have passed through fire and learned to carry only what matters. There is no longer a need for prophecy, not because all questions are answered, but because the questions themselves have changed. The age of endings has passed. What follows is the age of tending, of care, of quiet beginnings. And so, the gods walk again, not through halls of gold, but through meadows and shadowed forests. They do not shout, they do not command. They listen, they gather what remains. They speak softly to the wind, the soil, the stars, and the world listens back. For the first time in an age, there is peace not forced, but chosen, not held by fear, but by understanding. Lif and Lifrasir walk the new paths. Their children will not remember the burning sky, but they will remember the feel of sunlight on their skin, the sound of streams, the way the stars flicker when the night is truly dark. These memories, small as they may seem, are sacred. They are how the new world roots itself, not through might but through presence. And far above, Yggdrasil stands, older now, but still alive. The dragon still gnaws, the creatures still scurry, and watch and whisper. The tree is not whole, it never was. But it endures, not because it is perfect, but because it belongs. It is part of the cycle, part of the pattern, and in its trembling branches, stories rest like snow. Perhaps, then, this was always the purpose of the Viking prophecy, not to warn us of doom, but to prepare us for continuity, to teach us how to lose well, how to stand in flame and not be consumed by fear, how to walk into a world remade not as conquerors, but as caretakers, not with answers, but with open hands. And if we carry anything forward from this long myth, let it be this, that the world ends and begins and ends again, that we are born and fall and rise, that fire burns and also warms, that frost bites and also preserves, that even the deepest night eventually turns to light, and that beneath it all, through all of it, we remain listening, remembering, becoming. In the quiet aftermath of a world reborn, there is no rush to rebuild what once was. The Norse did not imagine a return to glory, to golden halls or great conquests. What they left us instead is something far more enduring, a space in which to become something else, something wiser, something slower, something rooted in the memory of what was lost, and in the tender promise of what might yet be. This space is sacred not because of what it contains, but because of what it allows. It is the pause between breaths, the soft light before dawn. The earth, still damp from the flood, begins to firm beneath bare feet. Trees stretch toward the sun, not hurried, not hesitant, simply following the old pull of life. In this rhythm, in this calm after collapse, the world finds itself again. There is no one left to rule this world. No throne waits to be filled. The old structures are gone, not destroyed in anger, but dissolved by the natural course of time. What replaces them is not hierarchy but harmony. The gods who remain walk gently. They are no longer arbiters of fate, but companions to it. Their wisdom is no longer in command, but in presence. Their strength no longer in domination, but in their ability to endure. And for humanity reborn from the sheltering bark of Yggdrasil is a time of quiet becoming. No histories yet written, no battles to avenge, only the raw beauty of a beginning, still unnamed. The world is not simple, but it is open, and in that openness lies its greatest power. Nothing is owed to the past, except remembrance. Nothing is promised in the future except change. This is where prophecy ends not in prediction, but in possibility. And it is here that we begin to understand what the Norse were really telling us. That the end is not a door slamming shut, it is a gate. And though we may walk through it afraid, uncertain, changed, we still walk through. We still move forward. And that forward motion, even in the smallest steps, is sacred. We are not asked to carry everything, only the lightest things, a memory, a name, a song. And in these, we find continuity not of power, but of meaning, not of empires, but of essence. And in this essence, we find ourselves, and the story goes on. The world remade is quieter than the one that came before. It moves with the pace of growing things, with the pulse of water and the slow unfurling of leaves. In this world, the echoes of the past are soft, but they are never gone. They live in the way light filters through trees, in the hush of wind across stone, in the firelight that still flickers when stories are told. And yes, the stories continue. Even in a world with no gods above and no monsters below, the stories are needed. They are the root system of the soul. They remind the people, those newly born into this gentler age, of who they were and of what it costs to begin again. Not to burden them, but to guide them. Not to frighten, but to prepare. For there will be new winters, new storms, new choices. And in those moments, the memory of what came before will matter. The myths may now be spoken with different voices, with fewer swords, with fewer screams, but they carry the same truth, that nothing is permanent, that everything sacred is also fragile. And that fragility does not make it weak, it makes it precious, worth tending, worth protecting. The gods too have learned this. Those who remain no longer seek to shape the world by force. They watch, they listen, they walk beside. Baldur, the light god returned from death, becomes a symbol not of conquest, but of compassion. Höður, who once struck down his brother by accident, now stands by his side, not in penance, but in peace. Their reunion is not a grand redemption arc, it is a quiet healing. And so the new world grows, not out of the ruins of fire, but from the soil it left behind. A soil rich with memory, memory that does not bind, but nourishes, that does not judge, but informs. And in this soil the people plant not only food, but meaning. And meaning, once planted, does what it always has, it grows. The old prophecies no longer apply. They have been fulfilled. But that does not mean the world is without story. It simply means that the next one must be made by those who live it. And in that creation there is joy, not because it will last forever, but because it will be true. It will be theirs. And far above, or perhaps deep within, Yggdrasil still holds the sky, still cradles the realms, still whispers the names of all that came before, and all that is yet to come. There is something sacred in the way stories end, not with fanfare, not always with resolution, but with silence, with space. The Viking prophecies have carried us across ages, through fire and frost, through betrayal and return. And now, in the softened light of a world made new, the echoes of all that came before still hang in the air, not as burdens, but as blessings. The people of this new age do not speak the names of the old gods as rulers or judges. They speak them as kin, as ancestors, as forces who once shaped the world and then stepped aside to let it grow. Odin, who gave so much to see what lay ahead. Thor, who fell with thunder in his chest. Frigg, who wept for her lost son. Loki, who pulled the threads of fate until they frayed. None are forgotten, but they are no longer at the center. The center now is empty, open, waiting to be filled by something softer. It is this openness that defines the new world, not the structures of old, not the conflicts that tore realms apart, but a breath, a beginning. And those who walk through this world do so quietly. The children of Lif and Lif-Rasir do not rush to name, to conquer, to own. They observe, they plant, they listen to the land before speaking to it. They ask nothing more of the sky than to see it. And in that stillness, a new kind of wisdom begins to grow. Perhaps that was always the truest prophecy, not the visions of flames or falling stars, but the vision of what could be made after, not in the hands of gods, but in the hearts of people, not shaped by fate, but by choice. And if the cycle must turn again someday, it will do so differently, with different voices, different mistakes, but also, perhaps, with more remembering. The runes, carved in wood and stone, are no longer read with fear, but with reverence, not as tools to control the future, but as records of what has been endured. Each symbol a reminder that someone once stood at the edge of the end and chose to carry the story forward. In the soft air of evening, the myths are still told, but they are sung more gently now, like lullabies, like prayers, not to hold on to what was, but to keep the roots warm. And in this quiet inheritance, there is more power than in any sword. For what is remembered lives, and what lives guides. And so we come to the near end of the tale, not with finality, but with a kind of sacred pause. The Norse myths do not close the book, they leave it open, as all living stories must. For the world is not finished. It never is. It breathes in cycles, just as we do. It changes shape, shifts form, and begins again in new voices, in new lands, with new questions. The prophecy has unfolded. The signs have passed. The old gods have met their fate and given way to silence. Yet within that silence, life begins once more. The sun rises, not with a roar, but with golden light filtering through new leaves. Rivers, unbound, sing again to stones, and in this untouched dawn, the world does not ask what it should be. It simply is. That is enough. No throne has been rebuilt, no banner raised. There are no crowns here, only open hands and steady eyes. The new people do not seek to rule what they do not yet understand. Instead, they walk the land like guests, with reverence, with care. They remember, even if they do not know the whole of what came before. Memory, after all, is not only what is preserved in wordsit, is what shapes how we move, how we see, how we love. The echoes of Ragnarök still live in the land, not as terror but as rhythm, a reminder that even the greatest fires can be followed by regrowth, that even the longest winters can be survived, that what ends is never truly gone. It changes form, becomes seed, becomes story, and those stories passed from one breath to another, become the soil of the soul. In this new age, there is no need for prophecy. The future is not foretold, it is chosen. And those who choose it do so with the knowledge carried gently in their bones. That all things fall and all things rise. That death is not the enemy of life, but its mirror. And that in facing the end, we become more whole, not because we conquer it, but because we accept it. And so, in the soft hush of a world rebuilt, we find not certainty, but peace. Not answers, but echoes. The kind that settle slowly in the chest. The kind that guide without demanding. The kind that remind us quietly, endlessly, that we belong to something older and wider than we can see. And in that belonging, there is nothing to fear. The story ends not with a clash, but with a breath drawn deep beneath the branches of a tree older than time. A breath exhaled softly into a world that has learned, at last, to listen. The Viking prophecies were never about fear. They were not warnings carved to terrify the living. They were invitations to understand, to remember, to endure. And as we stand at the edge of this myth, looking back over the long arc of fire, ice, silence, and return, we see not destruction, but devotion. A love for the pattern of the world, even when that pattern demands surrender. Yggdrasil still lives. Its bark may be scarred, its roots gnawed by old forces, its leaves weathered by storms, but it still stands. Not because it is perfect, but because it is part of everything. The dragon below it does not vanish. The creatures that move along its limbs do not stop. The world does not become safe. It becomes honest, open, awake. And in that awakening, something beautiful happens. Life begins again, not as a copy of what came before, but as a song with a new verse. It carries echoes, yes, the tone of old names, the scent of ancient wood smoke, the rhythm of memories kept in bone, but it also brings something never seen before, the chance to live with knowing, to build gently, to walk humbly, to remember not only the gods, but the quiet people who kept the stories alive. The vulva's vision fades, but her voice does not disappear. It lingers in the wind that moves across the grass. It hums in the lullabies of those who plant seeds without needing to see the harvest. It waits, quietly, in the breath between seasons. And we, the listeners, are now part of that voice, part of the tree, part of the turning. We do not need to predict the next ending. We only need to live this beginning well. So let us walk softly into this world, into our world, carrying what the Norse once carried. Not fear of the end, but reverence for the whole. Let us tend to what grows. Let us speak what matters. Let us remember the stories, not as facts, but as friends. And when the next winter comes, as it always does, we will know how to meet it, not by hiding, not by fighting, but by becoming the fire that warms, the root that holds, the song that carries memory through the dark. And from that song, another world will begin. Again, and again, and again. And so the story folds back into silence, as it always has. The world that burned is green again. The gods who fell are memories now. And the myths we have walked through of wolves and giants, of endings and dawns whisper to us still, across time. The Viking prophecies were not just about destruction. They were about rhythm, about the turning of great cycles, about how the world dies not once, but many times, and how, each time, something waits to be born. In their silence, the Norse left us a message, not of fear, but of preparation, of reverence, of remembering what matters when all else falls away. The fire may rise again, the ice may return, but now we know. We've heard the echo. We carry the thread. This was not just their story. It is ours, too. Thank you for remembering with me.